The hardest thing I've ever done was throw a handful of wet earth onto my wife's casket. The second hardest was looking at my two sons standing beside me and realizing they were the reason she was in that box. The rain washed the tears from my face, but it couldn't wash away their cold, impatient stares. And then my phone buzzed in my pocket. A single message that stopped my heart. It was from my dead wife, and it said, "I am alive. Do not trust our two sons." This is a story about the most profound betrayal imaginable and the breathtakingly clever revenge that followed. If you believe that justice should be served ice cold, you need to hear this. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because what happens when a mother's love is weaponized against the very children she raised is something you will never forget. Like this video, and let's dive into the darkness. My name is Arthur. For 45 years, my world was Margaret. She wasn't just my wife, she was my compass. We built a life filled with little joys. Sunday crossword puzzles, the smell of her rosemary roast chicken, the way she'd hum absent-mindedly while tending to her orchids. And the center of that universe were our twin sons, James and William. We weren't wealthy, not by a long shot. I was a civil engineer, Margaret a librarian. We worked hard, saved diligently, and eventually paid off a modest house in Portland. What we did have was a small life insurance policy, enough to cover final expenses and leave a little something behind. A parent's final act of care. We never imagined it would become a death warrant.
The change in the boys was subtle at first. A certain avarice that crept in during their 30s. Conversations always steered toward money. Their visits home felt less like family gatherings and more like appraisals. They'd comment on the value of the house, the vintage furniture, the land. We dismissed it. They're ambitious, we told ourselves. They're just concerned for our future. But Margaret, my brilliant, perceptive Margaret, wasn't drowning. She was connecting the dots. It was always worse after the boys visited. Always worse after one of them brought over a homemade stew or a special healthy green smoothie. One night, she gripped my hand, her skin pale and clammy. Her voice was a weak whisper, but her eyes were sharp, clear with a terrifying clarity. "Arthur," she said, "it's the boys. I think they're poisoning me." I recoiled. "No, Maggie, no. That's the sickness talking. That's grief." I wouldn't entertain the thought. But she was adamant. "The next time James brings soup, I'm not having any, and I want you to watch him. Really watch him." He came over 2 days later, all smiles and concern. A Tupperware of potato leek soup in hand. "Made it just for you, Mom. Lots of nutrients." He microwaved a bowl and placed it in front of her. Margaret feigned weakness, saying her stomach was too unsettled, but that I should have some. James's face? It didn't fall in disappointment. It flashed with something else. A flicker of panic. "No, Dad doesn't need it," he said too quickly. "It's for you." That was all the confirmation she needed. The mother in her died in that moment. The survivor was born. She went to the police. Of course, they were skeptical. A woman claiming her 40-year-old sons are slowly poisoning her? Without evidence, it was a family dispute. But one detective, a man named Miller, with tired eyes that had seen too much, saw the steel in Margaret's resolve. He heard the chilling logic in her theory. They weren't trying to kill her quickly. They were making it look like a slow, tragic illness. For both of us, the life insurance paid double for accidental death. Detective Miller laid out the grim reality. We need irrefutable proof, a confession, and to get that, we need them to think they've won. And so, the most painful performance of our lives began. Margaret secretly provided samples of the gifts the boys brought,
a half-eaten container of soup, a smoothie she'd pretended to sip. The lab found traces of a rare, hard-to-detect toxin, a slow-acting poison that mimicked organ failure. The plan was set. Margaret would deteriorate rapidly. I would play the heartbroken husband, which was the easiest part. I wasn't acting. My grief was real. The grief for the sons I thought I had, for the wife I was helping pretend to die. We staged everything. The ambulance, the hospital reports from a doctor Detective Miller trusted, the obituary visit, where I picked out a casket, an empty box that would haunt my dreams.
And then came the funeral. That cold Portland rain felt biblical, like the heavens themselves were weeping for the sin about to be exposed. I stood there, hollowed out, and looked at James and William. They wore black, but their masks of grief were paper thin. No red-rimmed eyes, no trembling lips, just impatience. They stood close together, and I saw William nudge James and whisper, "Almost done. The lawyer calls tomorrow." They were counting the hours until they could cash the check written in their mother's blood. That's when my phone buzzed. That message from a number I didn't recognize. "I am alive. Do not trust our two sons." My mind shattered. I thought I was having a breakdown, a cruel, grief-induced hallucination. I stumbled, and William caught my arm. His grip was firm, impersonal. "Steady, Dad," he said, his voice devoid of any real emotion. "It'll all be over soon." The irony of his words made me want to scream. Later, in a secluded booth at a diner miles away, Detective Miller laid it all out. He played audio recordings for me. My sons' voices, clear as day, captured on a wire Margaret wore during a final visit they paid to her in the hospital. James, "Is she finally gone?" William, "Almost. The dose was perfect. Dad'll be easier. A sudden heart attack from grief. Tragic." A cold, hollow laugh. "Funding our future with their deaths. Poetic, really." I threw up in the diner's restroom. The violence of my retching was the only sound that could match the violence they had done to our family. The weeks until the trial were a blur of numb agony. I had to look him in the eye, talk about the will, play the bewildered old man, while knowing the woman I loved was in a safe house, living a nightmare, and my children were monsters. The day of the trial arrived. They stood in the dock, arrogant, confident. Their lawyer painted Margaret as a sickly, paranoid woman, and me as a grieving fool. They thought they had already gotten away with it. The prosecutor saved it for his final witness. The state calls Margaret Albright. The gasp that swept through the courtroom was a physical force. The heavy doors at the back swung open, and there she was, my Margaret. Alive. Her face was etched with a pain I knew would never fully leave her, but she stood straight, her gaze fixed ahead, not on me, not on the gallery, but on her sons. The color drained from James and William's faces. William actually staggered back, grabbing the rail of the dock for support. James's mouth hung open, a perfect picture of utter, devastating shock. Their carefully constructed house of cards blew away in the hurricane of her presence. She took the stand. She didn't cry. She spoke with a chilling maternal authority as she laid out every detail. The suspicion, the plan with Detective Miller, the recorded conversations. She revealed how she'd secretly saved samples of their poisoned gifts. She was a lioness, and she was dismantling her treacherous cubs with forensic precision. I watched my sons' faces transform from arrogance to confusion to sheer, petrified terror. The illusion was shattered. They were caught. utterly and completely. The guilty verdict was a foregone conclusion. The words murder and conspiracy echoed in the wood-paneled room, and with each one, James and William seemed to shrink, their expensive suits suddenly looking like the costumes they were. They were led away in handcuffs. William looked at me, a final desperate plea in his eyes, a son seeking salvation from his father. But that boy was gone. All I saw was the man who poisoned his mother's soup. I gave him nothing but a cold, empty stare. James never looked back.
The revenge wasn't violent. It wasn't loud. It was the absolute, total, and humiliating collapse of their entire scheme. It was the mother they tried to erase, walking into the one room they believed was safe and shining a light on every single one of their shadows. Their inheritance wasn't money. It was a lifetime in a cell, and the knowledge that they were outsmarted by the very love they tried to destroy. I lost my sons that day, but the truth is, I'd lost them years ago to a sickness far more insidious than any poison. Greed. The boys we read bedtime stories to, the boys we talked to ride bikes, they were long gone. What Margaret and I still have is each other. We have a love that was tested in the most horrific way imaginable and did not break. We have the painful, quiet knowledge that family isn't just about blood. It's about loyalty. It's about trust. And sometimes the most dangerous poison is the one disguised as love. This story is a chilling reminder that the deepest cuts don't always come from strangers. If you felt that shock, that need for justice to be served, then do your part. Hit the like button. It truly helps us out. Let me know in the comments. Could you ever imagine a betrayal this deep? What would you have done? Subscribe for more stories where the underdog fights back and karma arrives exactly when it's least expected. Until next time.